going to be using a recursive query in the actual database that we have. And we're going to use it in the sales order header table. And the sales order header table has something interesting that's called a back order. So this is just some mock data with some of the columns from the sales order header table. So we have an order ID, we have an order date, and then we have something called the back order ID. So the order ID is, of course, the unique identifier in the sales order header. We have an order date, like usually there's something like who's ordering it and things like that. Maybe a salesperson ID or something. But importantly, it shows that this order here doesn't have a back order. So this one was not back ordered, but order 2 here, it was back order, and the back order ID is 5. And that actually is referring to this one right here, meaning this order could not be fulfilled. So what we did is we created another order, and this is the order for that order. It so happens that this back order was actually also back ordered. And then this back order was in turn back order. So we have many layers. This must have been a really hard order to fulfill, I guess. Here's another order. This one had a back order ID 6. So order 3 was back ordered. And here we evidently fulfilled it because we have no back order ID. I mean, we could be adding one later, but for now it looks like we are not having any back orders for it. All right, so our goal now then is to find out what are the back orders are currently, what are the deepest level of back orders. So I want to find out information about back orders and the history of those back orders. So where do they come from? But I don't want to find out information about a back order that has in turn been back ordered. I want to have the lowest level of each chain of back orders. So given that we worked with recursive queries before a little bit, we want to start out with some sort of initial set. And we can choose to start at the bottom or the top of the chain. And I'm going to choose to start with original orders. So I want to find out all the orders that have been back ordered, but that themselves are not back orders. Because then if they are themselves back orders, then that means that they are not the original order that started the whole chain. But I'm not interested in sales orders that were never back ordered at all, because they are not the start of a chain of back orders. So let's go ahead and start by selecting some information. So I'm going to select order ID, order date, and back order ID. And I'm going to pull this from the sales order header table. I'm going to call this A. So I'm simply opening up the sales order header table and getting these 3 columns out of there. And then I'm going to be joining the sales order header with itself. So I'm essentially going to create a copy of the sales order header table and join the sales order header table with this copy of the sales order header table. And I'm going to do a join. And then let's go and think about what we want to use. But first I'm going to type sales order header table up here again. I'm going to call this B. And then we're going to do on, and we're going to do, this is where we actually need to think about a little bit what we're going to join them on. So I'm interested in pulling those original sales orders. So this would be potentially original sales order, but notice there's no back order ID. So this one is not of interest. So that actually tells me that I'm going to have a where clause that says where back order ID is not null. Because if it is null, then it hasn't been back ordered and it hasn't started a chain of back orders. However, how do I know if an order itself is a back order? Well, I'll look at the order ID. So say 4 here, and then I'll look at, was that a back order for another order? And I don't see 4 in here, so that's good. But 5, for example, I don't want to include 5 because it is a back order for order 2. So I need to look at the order ID and compare it to the back order ID. So I'm going to join on order ID from A to the back order ID of B. So I want to join them on order ID equals back order ID, B back order ID. However, didn't we just say that we did not want them to be equal? Well, so I want to include all the rows from the original from the sales order header table that don't have a corresponding back order ID in this copy of the sales order table. So what I need to do is I need to use a left outer join here, and then I need to have a where clause that says where B back order ID is null. I also earlier said that I don't want to include any rows where there is no back order ID. So I'm going to say where and A back order ID is not null. So basically this is my original table here. I'm going to say I don't want to include any rows here that don't have a back order ID, because otherwise it didn't start a chain. I am then also going to be joining on order ID. I'm going to join with another table that looks identical to this. And I'm going to join this column on this column, but this column in the original table with the back order ID in this copied column. So then what I'm going to see is if is 5 a back order ID in this other copy, and it is, and therefore I don't want to include that one. So I'm going to join on this, and I'm going to say that has to be null. So this one should not have a corresponding row that has a back order ID. So I'm going to say B backorder ID is null, but A backorder ID is not null. All right, so then let's go ahead and run this. So I'm getting a syntax error here that says syntax error close to the on here. And the problem, of course, is that I wrote left on, whereas it should be left join here. And then on should be by itself. So then let's go ahead and try to run it again. So here now then we have a list of all our orders that are the original orders of the back order chains. So for example, order ID 1 started a order chain and the first back order was 45. It might be the last one too, but it's 45. We however, would not expect then 45 to be in here because that was not the first order. So, and you can see that it's not in here. So this should be a list of all the orders that have a back order ID, but that themselves are not back order IDs. So to get more information about the chain, what we now then need to do is to look at these orders. So now we need to create another table that looks like this, but where the order ID is 45, 46, 47, and so on. So if we try to understand a little bit what just happened with the example above, remember we have these rows. So what this query should be returning, it should not be returning 1 because it doesn't have a back order ID. It shouldn't return 4, 6, or any of these other ones because they do not have back order IDs. It should return 2 because 2 has a back order ID and it's not a back order itself. It should also return 3, but it should not return 5. Even though 5 has a back order ID, 5 itself appears in the back order ID column. So 5 is a back order that also is then later back order, but we only wanted the original back orders. Or sorry, we only wanted the original orders. Let's see, 7 should not be included because 7 itself is a back order. 8 should be included because 8 has a back order ID and itself is not a back order. So we would expect then 2, 3, and 8 in our result. And that's what we're seeing down here. Here I'm showing that if we only use the second part of the where statement where we say that a back order ID is not null, then we will get all these records. But then when we in addition apply this is null statement, where we're saying that the order ID here should not be in this list right here, then you're seeing that we filter out 5 and 7 because 5 appears here and 7 appears here. All right, so now let's go ahead and add another layer to this where we're pulling information from these 5, 6, and 12. So we continue down the chain. So we're going to do that using just a regular CTE expression. So I'm going to start with typing with, and then I'm going to call this, the original ones are let's call it the originals. And that's defined, and we already defined that earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this code. Let's look at my indentions, that looks good. And then I'm going to have another one that I'm going to call the back orders. So I'm going to go ahead and indent these, and then I'm going to call these back orders. And I'm going to define that. Let's see, so we said that we want to get information from the sales order header table for these originals. I'm going to say, and I'm going to select the same things because we're going to add these together because I don't want to have a different set of fields that I'm pulling. So I'm going to select, and I'm pulling this from the originals. I'm going to call that A. And when I think about it now, actually, I don't want this information from the originals. I'm going to want that from the sales order header table. So I'm going to change this to B. I could, of course, also just say from sales order header table, but I kind of feel like I'm starting with originals and I'm adding the sales order header table back here. So anyway, I'm going to join this then with the sales order header table because I want information about these back orders here. So I want information about 45, 46, 47. And what the information I want is the order ID, order date, and if they have a back order ID in turn, I want that information. So let's see, what am I going to join it on then? I'm going to join it on, let's see, so I'm going to join on the back order ID here to the order ID of the sales order header table. So it's going to be A dot back order ID equals B dot order ID. And then that should now give me information about these orders right here. And then to select all these, I'm going to union these together. So I'm going to stack what I get from here to what I get from here. So essentially I'm going to get all these here that I have from the originals. And then I'm going to get all of the back order information from those originals. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to do some fixes here on my parentheses. And then I'm going to say select star from originals. And then I'm going to have the same thing almost. I'm going to union them together. And I'm going to have the same thing. Select star from back orders. And then let's go ahead and run that. I'm actually going to order by order ID too, so I see the results a little bit easier. It might make sense to have them in this order because then I see all the originals come first, and then below them comes all the. So I'm going to sort them by order ID, and I'm going to be pulling the order ID from originals. I forgot my order by. So now order by originals dot order ID. That's giving me an error already. Let's see what that error is telling me. It's missing a from clause. I'm sorry, you can't see this, but it says a missing from clause entry for table originals. So select star from originals union, select star from back orders. I need to, what I'm doing wrong here is that I'm thinking a join here. I actually, with this union here, I'm stacking things together. So I really only have one order ID column. I don't have the originals order ID column and the back orders order ID columns. I only have one order ID column. So I shouldn't have an alias here. Or I shouldn't tell SQL where it's coming from because I only have one table that it can come from. And then I go ahead and run this. And I get 14,592 rows, so pretty much doubled it up there. And then let's see, here for order ID 1, I had a back order ID 45. So now I'm expecting 45 to be in here too. And here we see back order ID, order ID 45, which was a back order for order 1. And that one has not been ordered again. So that is the final back order for this chain. But we have a bunch of other ones too. And some of these are going to have additional values. So let's see here, 80, 131. So see if 80 was an original order somewhere that had been back ordered. No, here is 79, right? So it seems like 80 was maybe also an original order. So I don't see any in there. But there are things that where we have multiple levels of the chain. Okay, so next we're going to take this and we're going to go ahead and change this into a recursive query. Because basically right now all I'm getting is one more level and I want to keep digging. So as I'm pulling 45 here, let's pretend there was another order ID here. Now I want the information about that order ID and I want to kind of keep going till I'm done with all those levels. And then on top of that, we want to add this whole like idea of I only want the lowest level, and I also want to know how deep that level is, and I want to know the chain of orders that took me to that level or to that order. We can do that in another tutorial.